Hi, and welcome to VIBEZ Daily. This is a daily devotional curated by VIBEZ Church to help you practice the way of Jesus and be all that God has called you to be. You have joined us for our year-long series titled Devoted. Acts 2:42 tells us that the followers of Jesus were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer. This podcast was created to provide context and commentary for what you read each day. Just before our friends begin discussing today's reading, we want to invite you not only for fellowship, but for prayer as well. We have created the VIBE Daily Chat Group to offer you fellowship and a community where you can state your observations, ask questions about the reading or the podcast. You can join us by downloading the VIBEZ Church app in your favorite app store. Click Join the Conversation and join us today. And finally, we hope that you can join us for prayer. Prayer happens Monday through Friday, and more information on that can be found on the VIBEZ Church app under prayer. Now, let's begin our conversation on today's reading.
All right, welcome back to the VIBEZ Daily Podcast, day 29 of our reading. We are in the final week of reading through Exodus. We will actually complete the entire book by the end of this week, so very excited about that. I am glad to be back with my friends again, my wife Victoria, my friends Shameeka and Dylan, who is representing some of our other merch that we have in our stores. So
Get your
again,
merch.
Check it out. Yeah, get yours as well. That's one of our favorites there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so excited to be back here as we've done every week since we've started. We'd love to start with a quick Bible question. As we've read through those thus far, we've encountered a few different names of God, right? Different things that people have labeled God in different situations. I'm just curious, and you can go through the whole Bible in this, so necessarily have to just pick what we've already covered. Is there a name of God that has meant something to you particularly, something that's been more special to you, kind of maybe than some of the others?
Oh, okay. I feel like all eyes was like.
Yep.
All right, so I would say initially growing up, it was actually Jehovah Shalom, the God of peace, because we used to do a youth retreat every year for our church. And I was on the team that year we did like the names of God, and I was on the Jehovah Shalom team, and I had never heard of that name of God before. But as learning about it throughout the weekend, it just meant something different to me. I learned so much more about it. So that one was most of my favorite, like growing up. But now I think it's Jehovah Rapha.
Come
like
on.
the God, the healer,
Yeah.
because if you guys know my background, the desire to be a physician and all of that, and I think the Lord stopped me in my tracks one day. I was like, no, I'm the ultimate healer, and I was like, well, come on with it, Lord, all right?
Yes.
So he put me in my place, and so I'm learning him as that right now.
Love that.
That's really good. I mean, I guess I'll go. The first name of God that stuck out to me, and I can't even tell you why, was Yahweh. It was just one of those things, again, like how you said, was unique that I hadn't heard before, but I also love the initials of it, the YHWH. Like, that's still a tattoo that I want to get. It's so bad. Just because it does mean a lot to kind of know that God has these different names. But also, Emmanuel is a name that I love. God is with us. Like, just that reminder that, like, God is present. He's with me. Like, he'll never leave me or forsake me. Like, and oftentimes during Christmas time, you hear it sung about a lot. But even just throughout my life, Emmanuel, like, knowing God is with us is
All your
super
life you heard Emmanuel. That's my middle name.
There you go.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. You
We're
done?
good. You
Okay.
good.
All right. I don't know if it is a name, but I think about Hagar's encounter with God and like just saying like God who hears me.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that has just based off of the reading thus far. I know we're like you can pull from any point in the
Yeah, it's
Bible.
Elroy, the guy who
Elroy,
sees.
right? Yeah. That's my favorite right now. It's just like just to know that God hears you is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good. For me, I'd probably just have to go with Jehovah Nissi, which was there in we read that when we were in Genesis still. I'm sorry, in Exodus 17 is where that comes from. We actually just read that last week. It is actually, I do have a tattoo that says Jehovah Nissi on my back. And it comes from a time in life where what I've always loved about that story, because again, we read it last week, was ultimately while Moses had his hands lifted towards God in worship, the Israelites were winning their battle, right? And it just always like for me made me think like as long as I stay in worship towards him, like as long as I stay focused on him and whatever the case may be, like I can overcome anything. And there was a time in my life that was really important to me. And so I've loved that story. Again, it's the one I'd have to go to. It's the one of the few tattoos I have on my body. So it would kind of be interesting to pick a different one. But the Lord my banner is what that means. And again, for me, it's just that reigning in victory in God. So cool. Yeah, I love this. I feel like I'm learning something about you guys each week. So it's really cool to just get to know you guys a little better and hopefully you all as well. So, and I encourage you, look, in our chat, in the comments on YouTube, anywhere, share your favorite. Let us know what your favorite name of God is or anything that's been significant to you in your life. We love to hear from you as well. But let's jump in because we have a lot of reading this week. We did 4 chapters each day is what we will be covering. And so we have a lot to get through, but we have 4 chapters here today. Chapters 21, 22, 23, and 24 is what we will cover. I'm going to back up slightly to the end of chapter 20 because if you recall last week, we kind of left off just before the end of 20 because we get into these additional laws, and I felt like it was better to discuss that in addition to these other chapters here. But let's talk about kind of end of 20 into 21 as Moses gives us some additional laws on various different topics. I'd love to just get your guys' thoughts on what you see here, anything that just jumped out to you about these laws.
Yeah, I think we probably talked about it last week, but just that constant reminder to not have any of their gods before God, and even going down when it talks about the idols and the altars and stuff in verse 23, it says, do not make any gods to be alongside me. Do not make for yourselves gods of silver or gods of gold. Like, I think God had to be so specific because he knew just the history and the tradition of which like most pagan people would celebrate their gods or even just have these different things to represent them. And so we'll read further on throughout this week just why that was so important, but that's something that always sticks out to me because it's like he knows like the innate nature of the human to want to have something. And I think I'm finally kind of like getting to a point of understanding that like just like how sometimes it's hard for us to have a relationship with God because he's not this tangible thing that we can actually touch. I think in that time, it just was really important for them to have something tangible to have to touch, to kind of be like, okay, now this makes sense. Like I have this thing that I'm seeing that I'm bowing down to. But yeah, just God reiterating, no other gods before me. Don't make them out of nothing. Like, because he knows how they typically roll. So yeah.
And I thought about that as well because he starts off with the 10 Commandments in chapter 20, like no other gods. Like, let me just, and then here we get to the end of the chapter and he's again reiterating, like you said, no other gods. But like you said, I think about it in my life, putting anything above God or anything before God, but so often like how I can use like, let's say like money, right? And like, or job security or something like as my God, like I am expecting that to provide for me. And so in a season when I don't have, it's like, oh, the Lord came through. Like he came through, he provided, like, but then like you said, in the next season or a couple of weeks later, like all of a sudden, like I'm looking for the check or I'm looking for this to like be what I need. And so I know we all have a testimony in that, but whatever it might be, you know, finances for me used to be for men, right? Like, or friendships or whatever it is, like, it is really hard to remember that God is everything you need.
For sure.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to me, and I know I'm kind of going ahead a little bit, but we can kind of take these 4 chapters almost together. But I thought it was interesting that, like, you know, one of the things, Victoria, you pointed out last week was how the 10 Commandments are kind of structured as like our relationship with God, our relationship with others, and then just like about us, right? And like you kind of see these laws kind of play out in a similar way that, again, it starts with God, right? Like remembering who our God is, like not to replace him with others, you know, and not to have idols and things of that nature. But then it just goes right into like how we interact with each other, right? There's these laws about, you know, slavery and other theft and personal injury. Like it's all about like how do we interact with each other in a way that's loving and honorable and fair.
Yeah.
And then it gets to like Sabbath and some other things that are back to us, right? And this covenant that God has with us individually. And so I did think it was interesting that similar to how it was summarized in the 10 Commandments, that even when the rest of these laws come out, that it's still very much like our priorities. Number one is God, right? This vertical relationship. Then it's the horizontal relationships we have in our life that are important, that are to get right. And then after all that, it's about us, right? Yeah. And like just personally what we need to do. So I just thought even just the structure of these chapters and kind of looking at that was an interesting observation, particularly after what you shared last week.
And I think that's cool because like as we'll see in the New Testament, like Jesus saying like love God first, love others, and then love yourself. Like just seeing that correlation just happen is cool. Yeah. And sometimes we get that mixed up.
Yeah. It's usually the reverse.
Yeah. And we want to be at the
That's
top.
real.
Yeah. It's usually like me first.
Yep.
Then others, because I'm a people pleaser, and I got these personal, the people I like, I got these personal relationships, and then after all that, I'll try to squeeze God into my schedule. After I've done those other things that matter. So it's definitely upside down.
Yeah, when I was looking at these laws, I don't know about y'all, but I struggled like reading some of these
For sure.
because one, I was like, well, Lord, like I just feel like why do we have to include some of these? Like I know He's trying to get them structured, but like, can you just say like have one wife and only one wife only? Like, why do we have to make rules for like, well, if she doesn't please and he wants to divorce her and send her off, or even like if a man sells his daughter as a slave, I'm like, can we just not sell our kids as slaves? But I mean, I understand like culture puts people and other people put people in tough positions, and I know that God's forward thinking and knowing that they will be enslaved and ruled by the nations at some point because of their disobedience. But and so I think it's just interesting that like I was reading through these and I was like, well, why does this have to be a rule? Like, couldn't you have just said, don't do this at all?
Especially knowing that God just brought them out of slavery, but knowing that slavery is still like a thing in the sense of them having slaves and being masters. Like I could just imagine this struggle between like I know what it feels like to be in your shoes as a slave and to be treated so harshly, but yet like now I have the upper hand, if you will, and I'm having slaves. But you do see in some instances where God is protecting slaves to a certain extent, like where He's like, okay, like still don't do this or don't do that or don't mistreat them or those kind of things. But I did struggle with seeing some things like when it talked about like the like murdering or striking people with a blow. It kind of seemed like almost contradictory in some ways, where it's like if you do this, then you're gonna get put to death. But if that person lives, right, then like you good kind of thing.
Like verse 20 is just like if you hit your slave, but then like he's able to like get up and he survives a day or two. Like I'm like, wait, can we just say don't beat your slaves like that?
Right.
Okay, let's talk about this.
Yes.
I think this is a good conversation to have, because I think as you read this, as you said, right, we're reading this in 2024. So we have probably a different perspective and understanding of like what this looks like and what slavery looks like, right? But I think it's very interesting, because you have to also understand that like slavery at this time, in addition, again, obviously there were some of those experiences like what the Egyptians did to the Israelites, and that was very much more racial, right? That was very much more discriminatory. That slavery was all about that person and that people for who they were, nothing that they did or owed, right? And that is frowned upon by God, right? That is something that He saved them from. But the slavery that was often not just endorsed, but that had laws created around it was really like being indebted to someone, right? Like it's very much like right now we don't have slavery, we just got credit card debt. Like, and it's but it's a similar thing. Like I owe you, and so I'm gonna garnish your wages or whatever if you don't pay me back. Like in that time, that's why even you read the Hebrew laws that it starts with. It's like there's even a time period to that that piece of slavery. Like you have 6 years, and then after that you have to let them free,
right?
Because there was this time limit of like, hey, I owe you. I don't have the money or the crops or the animals to pay you back, and so my way to earn or to pay back the debt is to work for you for free. Right, and to pay that. And so I think again, it's important for us to keep in mind that, like, again, there's a different structure there. So if that is something that we're going to allow, right? Like, because at that time, they don't have credit cards, they don't have bank accounts, they don't have debt and loans, right? So if we're going to allow this, there have to be some rules around it, right? Like, if we're going to allow somebody to work for free to pay off something or to return that, then let's create some rules around what does that relationship look like. And I think that's fair and reasonable, you know, under those circumstances, which, as you said, the more you look into it, you go, man, God did protect the slaves. Like, he wasn't, he wanted them to still be treated like people. He even gave them opportunity, right? Where he said, man, if you just want to be a part of that family, cool, be a part of that family. Like, if you like, man, I had kids with them and I want to stay with my wife and kids and family, like, then I get the ability to do that. So I think it is important for us to talk about that, because we have a different perspective. I mean, just be honest, particularly this entire group, right? We are predominantly African American. We are African American. Our perspective on slavery is pretty isolated to what happened here in this country. And so it's hard for us to see, like, why would God say, okay? Like, why would God say, yes, that's fine? Because what we think of is that. And we go like, nah, God.
We good.
You should
I appreciate it.
You should just be like, nah, that's unacceptable. That you can't do that. But yeah, there's no way that what happened in this country specifically is something God would have endorsed, because again, it was racially driven, right? It was violent. It wasn't about owing anybody. It was about, I own you for the sake of my personal gain, and I own you and every descendant that comes thereafter you simply because I feel that I deserve whatever it is that you offer, right? And so, I don't know. I think that slavery conversation is definitely a good one to pause on, though.
For sure. I think that definitely gave context and clarity, for sure, because it is easy to be in that mindset. But that definitely makes sense.
I see the tendency of 7 being rest.
For sure.
Yeah.
The seventh year of just being free. And I see that as rest as well, from all the hard work in the 6 years. I would say, excuse me, there's a lot of cool, interesting things about slavery in here. I think about the whole piercing the ear thing. That was interesting to like read, because like that didn't even make any sense to me. Like, for a man to want to stay with his family technically owned by the master, if he wants to stay, he has to be pierced. Like that's a lot. That's a lot for me. Like, I don't know. That's just something that was kind of interesting.
One of my, the two verses that I did like, well, really 3, but I do like that in verse 18, God, and this is in chapter 22, it says, do not allow a sorceress to live. Again, because we know the culture, the history, divination being a thing that was part, that the people partaked in Egypt and stuff like that, like, God's like, because he is establishing that people that is set apart, he's like, don't even let this live, because he already knows like the road of wickedness that comes from that. And I also do like verse 21 is a good reminder where he says, don't mistreat or oppress a foreigner, for you were foreigners in Egypt. Like, just that reminder of like, hey, like, treat people how you want to be treated, and you were once a foreign people in the land, although a lot of your generation, that Egypt was all you knew. Like, that's not where you got started from. You know, the generations prior to that, and just having that mindset of remembrance of like, hey, you're right, like, God brought me out of a place that was foreign, and he's bringing to me a place that he's promised. So I thought that was really cool. And even in verse 31 was probably my last one, where he says, you are to be my holy people. And then he goes on to talk about what they can and cannot eat. But like, just knowing like God is specifically telling them like, you are my people, you're set apart. And there's a reason why all these rules and regulations and laws and things are coming up, is because like, you're holy, like you're different than any other being like in this world. And so that's the thing that really does set you apart. It's not just you being an Israelite, but like how you operate and how you serve me and how you move. And so I really love that verse.
Yeah. It's good. I think it was really interesting, like how much weight he put in honoring your mother and your father.
Yeah.
Back in chapter 21 and verse 18, like they should be put to death if any of them like strike their mother and their father. And, or verse 17, whoever curses their mother and father like is to be put to death. I was just like, we wouldn't make it in this generation.
We sure wouldn't.
Listen, kids would be getting left and right. Like, I mean, just one trip to Kroger and, you know, kids getting snatched up
Or Target.
Yeah. Listen, well, the toy section?
The toy section.
But to go along. But to go along with Shameeka's point, also, I'm sorry, now I'm jumping back to chapter 22, though. But this compassion that he sees, that he has for, he said, the oppressed and stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
I do love that. Like in verse 25, he's just like, you know, he is looking out for the poor. So he's looking out for the slaves. He's looking out for the sojourner. Like he's looking out for those who are poor. Because in verse 27, my Bible, it says, and if he cries out to me, I will hear, for I am compassionate.
Yeah.
And to me, it just really shows it. Like, yeah, he really is like, okay, you're supposed to be taking care of my poor. Don't like exploit these people.
Yeah. And that goes back to Hagar, like how you were saying, Dylan, like that moment where we do see like God's heart for all people. Like, you know, Jew, non-Jew, slave, non-slaves, like he's really compassionate about people in general. So that is.
Yeah, I love 27 too. It's like the fact that chapter 22, verse 27, talking about the coat. Like that could be that man's only blanket for the night. Like just him just caring so much for every detail to mention that. Maybe I might be chasing a mice on this, but why do he talk so much about an ox for like several verses? Y'all got anything for that? That was something that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's really it's more about, I would say, property and you know, these are their tools for their trade, right? Their trade is they're agriculturalists, they're farmers, they're shepherds. They live from the land. Like that's who these people were. And so their oxen are their greatest tool in that, right? Like that's something to use. And I think it speaks to, ultimately, again, it's really just a statement on personal responsibility, kind of like whose fault is this, right? So when we have this third party object or animal, right, that's not necessarily a human, who do we hold responsible for their actions or for what happens to it? And so I think it took so much time, and he deals with it so long because, I mean, a lot of their life is around what an oxen does, like, and how it helps them to live. And so they deal with, okay, if it falls in a pit, and like, whose pit is that? Like, you know, so is that just an accident that I just have to live with and I got to eat it? Or did somebody build that pit and they trap my oxen? Like, that's a whole different thing, right? Or does oxen go crazy and it hit and hurt somebody? Is that my fault? Or is it just an oxen being an oxen? I mean, ox being an ox, you know what I'm saying? Like, and I think it was just a lot of that because it's just so much of their day-to-day life, you know, surrounded that and use that. So I think it was what I love about even all of these laws here as we kind of get into them, and we'll get more into it when we get to Leviticus and the laws get even more detailed, is ultimately, again, God is trying to teach a people how to be holy, which is one of those things you said, right? We're trying to teach you how to be different and set apart. I'm trying to teach you guys how to love me, how to love each other. I want you guys to do that. And so I have to get into the details of like every situation you could potentially think of. And yeah, I may not cover everything, but hopefully I give you enough that you can start applying some of the stuff I've taught you to other stuff, right? So, you know, maybe I just got a dog and a dog bites you. Now I know, okay, that ox law where the ox like mauled somebody, I'm just gonna apply that dog bite to the same thing, right? Because I got enough examples, and I think God was trying to really be very detailed and very specific so that people weren't confused or unclear. And I think I love that about him, that it wasn't just let me give you these 10 and leave it open-ended and hope that you interpret them all.
Yeah.
But let me give you
That's
some
real.
actual practical examples of what that looked like.
As far left as they seem, like there's situations where these are things that's gonna arise.
That actually happened, I'm sure.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sure Moses went to God and was like, okay, what about this? Because this one cat, like, they came to me and said, this what happened. I didn't even know what to do about it. And God was like, all right, I got the answer for you.
Yeah.
Because at this time, Moses was judging, right? He had them coming to him with these complaints. But I was thinking, like, on one, like, God's trying to deal with us. Like, okay, this is how you conduct yourself.
Yeah.
The things that you can control in yourself.
Yeah.
And then as Eric was speaking, I was just thinking, like, okay, but what if I have something that I can't control, right? Like, my ox is out there. Like, as somebody who lived across the street from Dairies, I've been chased by a cow before.
Yes, I remember that. We were in 6th grade.
What?
She told me that
That's
story.
funny.
Yeah,
and scary.
I was chased by a cow, and it's kind of like, well, where's the owner? Like,
Yeah.
who do you belong to?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And so in my mind, I was just like, yeah, like these things that we don't have control over, like who's responsible? Like, somebody come get your cow.
That was
part.
hilarious.
I was just trying to go to school.
That's
It was
funny.
an interesting night. She
Ran
told me
for
that
your
story.
life.
And your kids. Yeah. Okay, just kind of for the sake of time. So there's a bunch of laws here, and I do encourage you. I mean, hopefully you're reading this. And again, a lot of this seems, I don't want to say out of context, because a lot of this stuff we don't encounter. We have our own laws now, right? Like, this is also, these are just governing laws for this body of people. We have our own as Americans that we kind of live by now in this country or wherever you live and wherever you're from. But I do, as we move into kind of 23, when we get to honesty, justice, and Sabbath, and some other things, I do just love that. Again, we see this idea of God's justice and mercy. It's a thing that we've been talking about since Genesis, right? Like, there's these balanced eye for an eye, right? Kind of like laws. But as you pointed out, there's this mercy and this care for the people who can't, care for themselves. And there's room for grace, and it doesn't always have to be death is the penalty for everything, right?
Yeah.
But like, let's find some grace in certain situations. So we kind of see that play out. But then we get to 23, and now we're getting into, again, back to the 10 Commandments, not to bear false witness. That one is kind of played out here in the beginning of 23 with some examples, which again, a lot of this does reflect what we just read in the 10 Commandments, but more so clearly defined and played out. And then, of course, the Sabbath again. So anything here in 23 before we get to the covenant and close out today?
Yeah, I was going to say that I love that God cares about the integrity of his people, because you do see in this chapter him just really talking about, like, not accepting bribes and, like, just not being enticed by certain things that you can easily be enticed by.
Right.
And knowing that, like, what that can do to their heart, and how, again, it just, because he is a just God, like, it now makes a system corrupt.
Yeah.
And so he pointed that out and just really made it known in that way. But also, again, like, you see his mercy and his compassion for the poor, where he's like, hey, like, don't deny justice to those who are poor in their lawsuits. Like, he's making it clear that there's no discrimination, and especially for those who are poor, like, don't take advantage of them. Allow for them to have the same right as someone who does have the money to be able to pay for certain things. Like, I feel like he really covered grounds with that.
Even with harvest too, like, he talks about planting harvest for 6 years for your crops, and on the 7th year letting the poor.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. It's like this, like you said, that 6 years of work and then rest.
Yeah.
And then like 6 days of work and rest. And I love that. Like, it really takes faith, because I'm not harvesting for a whole year. It's like I'm not working really like a whole year.
Yeah.
I mean, I get nervous, you get nervous taking vacation for 2 weeks, like, and so I just was thinking, like, what does that look like today?
Yeah.
Like, how do we do that today, where we just be like, okay, this is my year of like Jubilee where I'm like resting the whole year.
Sounds amazing.
Right, but I was about to say, but we know it's possible because we got to see Joseph really steward well
Yes.
a time of like abundance in a famine where it's like, here's the water bottle.
Because
We
I
need
know
that.
it's not here, but other places in the Bible it does say to us that like in that 6th year he will give us enough to cover the
Yeah.
7th, and so
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, let me start counting. Like, what year we started at, Jesus? Like,
Right.
we start this year 1. So I think that's really interesting. But I do love that even we move on to verses 10 through 19. It is this like rest, like enjoy the rest that I am like providing you. And then I think it goes on to like this theme of just like love God only, like honor him through your rest, love him, and then like celebrate with what God has provided you. I think it's not a coincidence that he wants them to have like feasts with the crops and the produce and the the herds and stuff that they have been able to grow through his provision. And so it's like, well, what I've given you, enjoy it. Like enjoy it with me in the way that I've asked you to. I think it's beautiful.
Yeah. And it's an invitation of trust. Like even when we go down to talk about the Sabbath, it's like, man, like you're really inviting me to believe that you're going to provide, period. Like that's the Jehovah Jireh coming in, but also that like if I do take a day off or if I am like taking a year off, like me resting isn't going to mean that I am missing out on anything.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah. And so good. Because I think like I love, and let me just start with this, because like in general, I love how applicable these laws are still today.
Yes.
Like the fact that these things are still good for us now. Like we honestly could live by these laws today and see so much like fruit in our lives and value in our lives. But I think the biggest struggle, to your point, and you guys with the 7th year type idea, is it's not even so much like there's an issue of trust and just believing that God will do. But I think the other part of human nature is there's just this desire for more. Like we always want more. And so like some of what we struggle to take off for the 7th year is I could be earning. Even if I feel like I got enough in savings to live, I'm thinking to myself, but I could get further ahead, right?
Yeah.
Or I can earn a little bit more, or there's this thing I want to buy, or this thing I want to save for. So like we have this mindset, particularly here in America, I can speak to that more so, of just like hustle and go and get. I'll never recall, there's a great book, Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer, and encourage anybody to read that book. It's amazing. But he points out this idea that like when the world went to like more automation, the expectation was that we would have more time in our day, right? That like when they started to automate things and save us time in like factories and things of that nature,
Right.
the belief was that in America, like we would have more time in our day. We'd be able to go home earlier, spend more time, whatever. The crazy thing was what happened was the complete opposite.
Wow.
We just filled that gap with more work. Like we just found more things to do. And we take efficiency and turn efficiency into more work.
Yeah.
Rather than saying, okay, well, now I can rest. And so I do think it's the human condition as well to avoid Sabbath and avoid rest, because we always think there's more we can get ahead.
Yeah.
Even in those points where we have enough.
Yeah.
We just don't. We're unsatisfied. We feel like we never have enough, no matter what.
And I think that speaks to idolatry too. Like we want to be our own gods. Like we forget that God, like the only one in living true God is like the God of abundance. But for us, it's like we're making ourselves the God of abundance, because if I do X, Y, and Z, then I know that this is what it's going to produce. And I get to say that I have this, savings, or I have, this abundance because I put in the work to get it.
Yeah, I'll be thinking these thoughts and then she just say it. That don't make any sense.
Because we're one.
Gosh, just let her speak.
Yeah.
I think that's so real and applicable. And it's like you said, it's like, it's still relevant today.
Absolutely. Yeah, so definitely something to reflect on and figure out, how do we live this out, right? How do we find ways to be intentional about Sabbath, about rest, about trusting God with what we have, not over pursuing for the sake of us believing we need more or just wanting more.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely a lot of personal reflection that can be done there. If you kind of continue to 23, there is kind of things with like promises and kind of some warnings and stuff here before we get into 24. Anything kind of at the second half of 23 that you guys want to point out before we deal with the covenant ceremony?
Again, just love these annual reminders, like holding these festivals and doing all these things so that they won't forget. Like he's trying to make sure that they remember what all he's done and what he's brought them out of. For sure. And even the mouths that he's taken to like send an angel ahead of them to guard them and like, make sure that they're good and that like they know that God is always with them. Again, that Emmanuel, like God is always with them. He's not going to leave them astray no matter how crazy it looks. Y'all in the wilderness, like you're wondering how you're going to eat, like just doing the extra work to make sure they know that like, no, I'm still with y'all. Like I still am upholding this promise to you guys. And him wanting them to like make sure they do their part too of like obey, listen, like just believe, like trust me.
I love this verse 20 because I think like last week, Dylan, you already mentioned it, like how this one of these angels like kind of sometimes resembles like Jesus or whatnot. But I love how specific he is. It's like in verse 21, it says, pay careful attention to him and obey his voice. Do not rebel against him, for he will not pardon your transgression, for my name is in him. And I'm just like, this is deep. Like, whoever this angel is.
Yeah, I was about to say, bro.
Like, whoever this is, like, you're like, he will not pardon your transgressions. And so I can't say, I can't say I wasn't there. I can't say who this angel was, but
Right.
it just seems like, and then keeps going in verse 22, like to carefully obey his voice. And I just love, he said that I'll be an enemy to your enemies, like that he really is like, do your part, and I'm going to do mine.
Yeah.
Like, do your part, and I will bless your bread, I'll bless your water, I'll take sickness away from you, none of y'all will miscarry, like, I'll fulfill the number of your days, you're going to live long, like, all this stuff, like, but the obedience part is so hard, as we see in these next couple chapters. Like it's so hard, and so I love that he gives this promise because when you see the Israelites or even our own lives, and we see that we're doing this, we do see the fruit. Like we do see him handling his part. It's up to us.
And that's was some solid promises that God gave. Like if I looked at that, I'm like, the fact that I don't have to be sick.
Right.
That in itself is just like,
what you need me to do, Lord?
Like for real, like. That's enough. And to have a full lifespan, knowing that like, there's already different things like, but yeah, I just thought it was cool because I'm like, what more do you want? Like you get to be fruitful and multiply, like no miscarriages, no grief from a miscarriage. Like God has continued to multiply
That's good.
the Israelites and it wasn't enough.
I won't lie, when I had my miscarriage a couple months ago, I was like, Lord, what did I do? Because your promises, like this said to follow and obey you. And then he assured me, it was for a reason. But I was like, what? Because I read the book, okay? The book said there was going to be no miscarriage. There's going to be no barrenness. Like, so what's the deal?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I love about that section is, again, it is very clear, like, do this, you will live. Do this, you'll die. And I do think that it is challenging, like when it's so clear why is any of us that read kind of beyond this in the Bible, we know Israelites don't actually do this, right? That's how they end up getting captured and exiled and all these other things. But even for our own lives, right? There are so many clear scriptures that give us clear instruction on how to live in peace or how to overcome the world and how to do so many things that like it would make sense that if we just did what God told us to do, that we'd experience that. And I love that it's just like promises and warnings. It's just like, hey, I'm gonna promise you this is gonna happen. It's gonna happen. And if you don't, this is what's gonna happen. And at least he gives us a heads up and it's fair in that regard, right? But we get to 24 and there's this covenant ceremony. Essentially, he's presented these laws to the people, and now this is kind of their moment to essentially accept this in a form of covenant, right, with God. What jumps out to you guys here in 24 as we wrap up today's conversation?
For me, I felt like when I was reading it, it was like their response was just too, I don't know.
Too good to be true.
It was too good to be true. I just felt like they just listened to all the good stuff. And it was just like, yeah, we'll listen to everything you do and say. It's like, did you even hear?
Yeah.
That's what I felt like just initially. It's like, I don't think y'all really heard what God said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
It did
said,
seem.
in my Bible, it says all the words.
Yeah.
All the words that the Lord has spoken, we will do. And it
Yeah,
was
I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly the vibe it was given to me. Like they were just so quick to be like, "Yeah, let's like really."
Like, we heard, we ain't gonna have miscarriages. We go, yeah, whatever the Lord said.
Right. I don't think it's settled in their hearts. Like,
sure.
It really.
Yeah. But I love it because, again, I can't judge them.
Yeah, that's
I
what we
can't
do.
judge them.
I know.
Like, I love the honesty of the moment, right? You get
Yeah.
caught up in the moment of like, God, I will obey. Like, yes, what you say will do. Like, you know, we tell that story all the time. Like our move here to South Carolina was a leap of faith that had a lot of fervor and excitement around it. And then like, yes, then you get there and you're kind of like, God, what did I just sign up for? Like, what am I doing?
This is
Like,
goop.
what did I give up? Like, yeah, I mean, even think about these Israelites, right? It was very similar. They leave Egypt, they leave a certain place, get here, and are looking back at Egypt like,
Yeah.
I want what we just had, right? And so, like, it makes sense. There's so much of us that we get excited early on, but back to even like the theme of this reading plan this year, this is where that devotion comes in, right? This is where that like commitment to not just my excitement today,
Yeah.
but my willingness tomorrow to stick it out and to do it. And then next week and next year and in 10 years from now, will I still be living that out and doing that? And again, I can't blame them for being excited and agreeing to that. It's the real hard part is, like I said, waking up the next day and then doing it. But yeah, anything else that kind of jumps out to you guys there? Sorry, I just kind of hijacked that.
No, I feel you.
No, I was gonna say like I really love the relationship that God and Moses have with each other. The fact that Moses is getting access to God in this way. And I mean, we gotta admit, we're proud of Moses. He came a long way.
Yeah.
Like thinking of him in the beginning when he's like, all right, not me, like choose somebody else, like to now being like every word that God says, he's like obeying it and making sure that verbatim. And to me, with my mind nowadays, I'm like, how is he remembering all this stuff? Like, this is a lot of specific detailed instructions that for me would be like, okay, this is weight.
Yeah.
Like, this is weight. Like, I don't want to forget anything. But the fact that he is following through, and even down to the point where, you know, he gets to spend time with the Lord on the mountain and he stays there for 40 days and 40 nights.
Yeah.
One, that puts it in perspective to me that it's not like this quick, like, oh, everything is just happening in 1 week. You know, like it really makes me think like, okay, this is actually time consuming. Like this stuff is not this little quick interaction and then he's going to tell the people and like, oh, no, like he spent 40 days and 40 nights with the Lord, and how amazing and blessed that time of solitude with God must have been meant for him. But also I'm thinking of Jesus, like he was in the wilderness for 40 days, like with the Lord, and just being able to see those parallels between those stories.
Something about folding.
Yeah.
Something about numbers.
I love it that Joshua went with him. Like Joshua is consistently right next to Moses, and he gets that extra access to
Yes.
God.
Yeah.
Where he goes up and the rest of them stay down. But I also love, just backing up to verse 9, like how God invited not just Moses and Aaron, but Aaron's sons and 70 of the elders to literally like eat and drink with the Lord. Like literally be in his presence, like eating and drinking with him. And which is interesting because they leave Aaron and Hur, which I was like, oh, there's my boy Hur again. But they leave them in charge. I'm like, you just left this mill, this clear pavement and all this, and you're seeing like the heavens of God. Like you leave all of this to do what they're about to do in a couple chapters. In 40 days. You know, they go and lead them astray. But
Man,
I do think that like I kind of wrote down my notes. It was like, wow, like he was very kind to let them experience that because he didn't have to.
Yeah.
That's good.
Absolutely.
That's good.
I wonder what they was eating. No, I was playing.
Nah, I want to know what they was
Same
eating.
thought, though, like what was it? Like was it grilled? Like what was it?
That's good.
Nice and
The
flavorful.
Lord does love some barbecue. I'll tell you that.
Yes, he does.
A nice steak on the on some fire.
Charbon.
Sweet aroma.
Charbon.
It is a sweet aroma. That's what the Bible say.
That's what he said.
I'd have to agree.
That smells good.
That's funny.
But yeah, okay. Well, look, it was really good. I mean, we covered a lot here in these 4 chapters of Exodus. Tomorrow we'll kind of deal with the tabernacle and that, which is a very interesting set of chapters as well. But man, again, read it. Please read it for yourself. Take time to go through it all because there is a lot in those first 4 chapters that we read here today. But thank you guys for your thoughts and whatnot. Look forward to continuing this week. We'll see you for 4 more chapters tomorrow. Take care.
Amen.
See y'all.
Thank you for joining us for the VIBEZ Daily Podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or download our favorite, the VIBEZ Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch. Join us next time as we continue our journey through the